Good morning, dear students. In the previous lecture, I have already completed your two chapters given in the syllabus, and today we shall start with and we shall try to complete the third chapter, that is reproduction, development, and growth in plants. All right. Actually, this chapter will be divided into three parts. In the first part, we will talk about the types of reproduction, asexual and sexual reproduction, and the different types of vegetative propagation in plants. And in the second part of the chapter, we will talk about the structure of the flower. And in the final part of the chapter, we will discuss the different agents of pollination, okay, and the mechanism of pollination. That will be the final part of the chapter. Okay, so let's start with our today's topic, with our today's lecture, that is types of reproduction. First, we should try to define the term reproduction here. Reproduction is the fusion of the male and the female gametes, okay, the fusion of the male and the female gametes in order to produce new offspring, okay. So reproduction, we can say, is an act by which the living organisms continue their progeny, produce their young ones of their own kind. All right. So there are two types of reproduction: asexual and sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, only one of the parent is involved. Both the parents, the male and the female, they are not involved here. Only one of the parents is involved here. That is the asexual reproduction. There is no formation of the gametes. But in case of the sexual reproduction, both parents are involved. One is the male parent and other is the female parent. Okay, and they give out their gametes. The male give their gametes called the sperm cells, and the female gives their gametes called the eggs, as in case of the human beings. But in the sexual reproduction, only one parent is involved, and in the sexual reproduction, two parents are involved. Now let's talk about the asexual reproduction in case of the plants. Asexual reproduction is usually found in the bacteria, fungi, in the lower forms of life, but it's also present in the lower forms of plants as well, like ferns and algae. All right. So there are basically four kinds of asexual reproduction, that is binary fission, fragmentation, budding, and spore formation. So remember, these are the four kinds of asexual reproduction present in plants, that is binary fission, fragmentation, budding, and spore formation. Let's define the binary fission first. In case of the binary fission, there is one cell, one parent cell. There is one parent cell, okay, and this parent cell divides into two daughter cells. This parent cell divides into two daughter cells. So this is the example of binary fission, and it is found in the case of chlamydomonas and chlorella. Chlamydomonas and chlorella. So in the binary fission, there is one parent cell that divides into two daughter cells, okay, and the example is chlamydomonas and chlorella. Second one is the fragmentation. In fragmentation, the parent body or the single parent, okay, it divides into many fragments. And these fragments are capable of developing into a whole new individual. In fragmentation, there are many fragments. Okay, the parent body divides into many fragments, and each fragment is capable of growing into a new individual. So this is fragmentation, and it's the example I will give. Spirogyra is an algae that divides through the fragmentation, or that reproduces through the fragmentation. What are we discussing here? Budding and fragmentation. These are the examples of the asexual reproduction. Four kinds of asexual reproduction are there. Binary fission we explained, fragmentation we explained. Next one is the budding. In budding, a bud develops on the parent body. This is the bud here. A bud develops in the parent body, and after some time this bud detaches from the parent. This bud detaches from the parent and is capable of growing into a complete new individual. This is called as budding, and the example is yeast. Budding is found in yeast, yeast. Okay, and the last one is the spore formation. During unfavorable environmental conditions, what are unfavorable environmental conditions? Suppose there is too much salinity in the soil or in the water, okay, or it is too much cold outside. Suppose in the winters, what happens during those conditions? Those conditions are called as unfavorable conditions. During unfavorable conditions, spores develop. Okay, spores develop. For example, in case of the bread mold, suppose this is a bread here, spores develop here in the spore sacs. In the spore sacs, these are the spore sacs here. And spore sacs develops the spores. What are spores? Spores are unicellular or single-celled spores present in the spore sacs, and during favorable conditions, on the return of the favorable conditions, these spores are, or the spore sacs, they are surrounded by a thickened wall. This thickened wall protects the spores from the unfavorable conditions outside, or it protects the spores from the desiccation. Alright, on return of the favorable conditions, this wall breaks up and the spores are released. And each spore is capable of growing into a new individual. Okay, and the example is bread mold. Spores are found in the bread mold. BREAD, bread, MOULD, bread mold. Bread mold is a fungi actually. Alright, so these are the four kinds of asexual reproduction, that is binary fission, then we discussed fragmentation, then budding and spore formation. Alright, another kind is the sexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, both the parents are involved, that is male parent and the female parent. Okay, this we will discuss when we will talk about the structure of the flower. It will be explained in the later half of the later part of this chapter. Alright, then there is vegetative reproduction. Vegetative reproduction is itself a kind of asexual reproduction. What is vegetative reproduction? It is a type of asexual reproduction. Why? Because you are here in vegetative reproduction, you will see that there is no involvement, there is no requirement of both the parents, and there is no formation of gametes. Gametes are not involved in the vegetative reproduction. So vegetative reproduction is a type of asexual reproduction. In vegetative reproduction, actually, new plants can be generated from any part of the plant, whether it is stem, root, underground stem, flower. Okay, so new plants can be generated from any other part of the plant like root, stem and leaves. This kind of propagation or this kind of reproduction is called as the vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation, as the name suggests, new plants can be developed from the vegetative parts of a plant. And what are the vegetative parts? It may be underground stem, it may be leaves, it may be roots. Alright? So vegetative propagation is itself of two kinds, that is natural vegetative propagation and artificial vegetative propagation. Natural vegetative propagation is of four kinds, means new plants can be developed from either underground stem or aerial stem or leaves or roots. Let's discuss them one by one. From underground stem, natural vegetative propagation can be from the tubers. Tubers, as in the example of sweet potato. What are tubers? Tubers are underground swollen stem or underground stem with buds called eyes. For example, in case of the potato or sweet potato, you see these dots there. What are these dots? These dots are actually the eyes. Okay, and actually they are the buds. and each bud or each eye is capable of growing into a new potato tuber. All right. So when these buds they get detached from the parent or intact with the original tuber, these buds are capable of growing into a new potato tuber. Okay, so this is the potato tuber is the underground stem which has dots called eyes or buds, and each dot or each bud is capable of growing into a new potato tuber. Okay, so potato tuber is an example of underground stem. Next one is the rhizome. What are rhizomes? Rhizome is an underground stem with distinct nodes and internodes, with distinct nodes and internodes, as in the case of the ginger. Okay, doesn't ginger looks like this? It has distinct nodes and internodes. Okay, the constructions here, these are the nodes. Okay, these are the nodes, and the space between the two nodes is the internode. Is the internode. So ginger is a type of rhizome. Ginger is a rhizome. Always remember, sweet potato is a tuber and ginger is a rhizome. And what is rhizome? Rhizome is shortened underground stem with distinct nodes and internodes. Okay, and they are capable of. They also have buds here, and their buds are capable of growing into a new ginger plant. Okay, and this is the example of rhizome. Rhizome example is ginger. Ginger is an underground stem with distinct nodes and internodes bearing buds, and these buds are capable of growing into new plants. Next one is the corm. Corm example is gladiolus. Corm example is gladiolus. Gladiolus. Corm example is corm. Corm example is gladiolus. What happens in the what is a corm? Corm is also an underground stem with swollen base. Underground stem with swollen base bearing buds. It also has a bud. Okay, and it is covered with scale leaves, and this bud is capable of growing into a new plant. Example is gladiolus. And the fourth one is the bulb. Bulb example is onion. Onion is the example of bulb. What is a bulb? Bulb is an underground swollen stem which is covered by leaves, has two kinds of leaves, scale leaves and fleshy leaves. As you see in the onion, the leaves that are covering the onion are actually the scale leaves, and when you remove the scale leaves, you see the fleshy leaves. Okay, it also has a bulb and is capable of growing into a new plant. All right, so we are discussing vegetative propagation here. Of two kinds, natural and the artificial propagation. Natural propagation has four kinds: stem, aerial stem, leaves, and roots. We were discussing the underground stem here, while we talked about the tubers, rhizome, corm, and bulb. Sorry. And next one is the aerial stem. Aerial stem. In some plants, like strawberry, in case of the strawberry, okay, the aerial plants, when they touch the aerial branch, suppose this is a strawberry plant here, and it's one of the aerial branch, okay, it grows horizontally, and when it touches the soil, it produces new roots here. And a new strawberry plant arises here. Okay, so this is the example of aerial stem, natural vegetative propagation, and the example is strawberry. And next is the leaves. Vegetative propagation can also happen through the leaves, as an example of the bryophyllum. Suppose this is the bryophyllum leaf here. Okay, the bryophyllum leaf has buds on the margins. Okay, it has buds on the margins, and when these buds they get detached from the parent leaf and fall to the ground, they can grow into a new plant. Okay, so this is the example of vegetative propagation through the leaves. And similarly, vegetative propagation can also occur through the roots, as in the example of common grass that you see in the garden. Okay. Now let's talk about the artificial vegetative propagation. It is a four artificial vegetative propagation means it is vegetative propagation, but it does not happen naturally, but it is done by the human beings. It is done by the mankind or the human beings. That's why we use the term artificial vegetative propagation. It is of four kinds: cutting, layering, grafting, and tissue culture. What happens in cutting? In cutting, for example, in the rose plant, we cut the branch or the shoot of the rose plant, okay, and we take this and place it into the soil. And when we place it into the soil, after a few weeks, new roots are being produced here and a new rose plant is generated. This is called as the cutting. Number second is the layering. In layering, suppose in layering, layering as in the example of the lemon, one of the branches is lowered towards the soil. One of the branches is lowered towards the soil, towards the ground, and covered with soil here. After a few weeks or after some time, new roots are developed here. And this branch is cut from the parent plant. As a result, this plant is capable of growing individually. Understand? In layering, we are discussing layering here. In layering, one of the branches is bent towards the ground and is covered with the soil. After some time, it produces new roots. And on the production of new roots, okay, it is detached from the parent plant and is capable of growing into an individual new plant. This is the example of layering, and it is done in the case of lemon, 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 jasmine, and rose also. Third type of the artificial vegetative propagation is grafting. In grafting, two plants are involved. There is a fusion of two plants. One plant is called as the scion, and another plant is called as the stalk. One plant is called as the scion, and other plant is called as the stalk. We take shoot cutting from one plant, which is called as scion, S-C-I-O-N, scion. Okay, we take its shoot cutting. Suppose I took this, okay, and then I placed this stem cutting or shoot cutting into another plant. I took this and fused it here and covered it with soil. This plant is called as the stalk. Okay, as a result, this branch grows and we call this fusion as grafting. In grafting, we took a graft, that is a piece of the shoot from one plant called a scion, and fused it onto the another plant called a stalk. As a result, the good qualities from this plant got fused with the another plant. This is done in the case of the orchids, ORCHI, orchids, rose, etc. And last one is the tissue culturing. Tissue culture is an artificial propagation, a very advanced technique where millions of plants can be produced from a single plant or a single plant propagule. In tissue culture, for example, the growing ends of the shoot are cut. Suppose this is a plant, okay, the roots here. Here this end, which is called as the shoot apical meristem. This is cut, and it is allowed to grow into a medium. And in the medium, these cells grow into an unorganized mass of cells, which we call as the callus, and this callus is then allowed to grow into a new medium, where many plantlets are produced, and these plantlets are then transferred into the field for acclimatization. Acclimatization is a process where the plantlets from the tissue culture are sown or placed into the soil so that they can develop or they can adapt with the growing conditions of the natural environment. So this is the example of tissue culture. So this is all about today's lecture, and in the next part of the video lecture, we will study the structure of the flower and finally the different types of pollination. Thank you for watching me. Good morning to all. Welcome to this new video lecture, wherein we shall study about the flower. We all know that all living organisms reproduce to continue the survival of their race or the survival of their species. Likewise, in animals, they reproduce and produce their offspring to continue their race. In flowering plants, this reproduction is performed by the flower. In sexually reproducing plants, the continuity of the race or the continuity of the species, this process is done by the flowers. So, and flower is the most beautiful and conspicuous part of the plant. Flower is the most beautiful and conspicuous part of the plant. So this is the morphological definition, right? But what actually is flower anatomically? Flower is actually a modified shoot, right? We know that the different parts of the plant, root, shoot, leaves, etc. So flower is actually the specialized shoot. Flower is actually the specialized shoot in which the leaves have been modified into different floral parts. Flower is a specialized shoot in which the leaves have been modified into floral parts or floral organs, right? So this is a definition of a flower. Flower is actually a specialized shoot. Here I have also drawn a diagram of a flower. We should study about its different parts. In this lecture, we are going to study about flower, like what are complete, incomplete flowers, what are essential, non-essential parts of the flower, what is perianth, bracts, nectaries, sexuality in flowers, and inflorescence. So we are going to cover these subtopics in this lecture. Understand? So flower by definition is a specialized shoot. Now, these are the different parts of a flower. Flower can be studied through different parts. These are the different parts of a flower. Okay. Flower, the first whorl of the flower, the green or the first whorl of the flower is the sepal. Sepals are usually green in color. Okay. So this is the first whorl of the flower. Actually, flower arises from the base of a stalk. So this is actually the stalk from where the flower is arising. The flower is arising from the axil of any leaf or from the stem through the stalk. So it is through the stalk that the flower is arising, and the upper part of the stalk, it may be swollen. The upper part of the stalk may be swollen sometimes, which is known as the receptacle. R-E-C-E-P-T-A-C-L-E. The swollen part of the stalk is known as the receptacle. Okay, and these four floral whorls: sepals, petals, stamens, and pistil. These four floral whorls, they are attached to the receptacle. What is receptacle? Receptacle is the swollen part of the stalk, And what is stalk? Stalk is the base of a flower through which the flower arises from the stem or the axil of a leaf. Understand? So now coming to the different parts of a flower. Now first whorl is the sepal. Flower is arranged into 4 whorls. Flower is arranged into 4 whorls on the stalk. Okay, the first whorl is the sepal. Sepals are generally green in color. Okay, they are generally green in color, and they can also perform photosynthesis. Sepals are usually green in color. They can also perform photosynthesis, and they can provide protection to the other 3 whorls of the flower, that is stamen, petal and pistil. So what is the function of the sepal? They can perform photosynthesis, and they provide protection to the different parts of the flower. Understand? Okay. Now sepals, they're usually green in color. They can remain attached to the flower sometimes, like we have seen in the case of the tomato or capsicum. You see, on one side of the tomato, you will find those small green-like structures. Those are actually the sepals. So tomato, they belong to the family Solanaceae. So we can say that in the Solanaceae family, the sepals are persistent. They are not shed off. But in other flowers, the sepals are shed off after the maturity. Okay, but in Solanaceae, sepals are not shed off. They are persistent there. Understand? Okay. Now, the second whorl is the petal. Sorry, first whorl was the sepal, and there may be 4 or 5 sepals present in a flower, and they are collectively called as calyx. Sepals are collectively called as calyx. Similarly, the second whorl is the petals. Petals are the colored parts of a flower. They are colored. These are the petals. So I have drawn 3 petals here as I could draw, because it's not possible to draw a 3D diagram on the blackboard. So I have drawn a 2D structure. So these 1, 2 and 3, these are the petals. So petals are the colored parts of a flower. They are because they are colored, so because of their color, because of their beautiful color, they are going to attract the insects, the honeybees, okay, for the pollination. So these are actually meant for the pollination. These are actually meant to attract the insects for pollination. What's pollination? Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of the stamen to the stigma of the pistil. Okay, we shall discuss this later. So we were discussing the petals. Petals is the second whorl after sepals. Okay, the bright colored whorl of a flower is called as the petals. Okay, the bright colored whorl of a flower is called as the petals. And petals, like I have drawn 3 petals here, first, second and third. Petals are collectively called as the corolla. Petals are collectively called as the corolla. Now, sometimes the petals are usually, there's only one whorl of petals, okay? But sometimes there may be a second whorl of petals. There may be a second whorl of the petals. For example, poppy. Poppy, P-O-P-P-Y. Poppy has 2 whorls of the petals or corolla, okay? And sometimes these petals may be spirally arranged. These petals may be spirally arranged. An example is the water lily, the flower of the water lily. Understand? Petals, there may be 2 layers of the petals. The example is the poppy, and sometimes the petals may be spirally arranged, and the example is water lily. Understand? Now this is the second whorl of the flower. The first one was the sepals, and the second one was the petals. Now, sometimes we know that the petals are brightly colored and the sepals are green in color. But sometimes the sepals and petals, they cannot be differentiated from each other. They look like each other, and that condition is known as the perianth. Okay? And in that case, we call them as perianth. Means the sepals and the petals, they look like each other and cannot be differentiated from each other. And in that case, we do not call them sepals and petals, but we call them as perianth. Okay. So this is the second whorl of the flower, that is the petals and corolla. The third whorl of the flower is the stamen. Stamen is a bilobed structure, like it has a bilobed anther and a filament and a thread-like filament. Okay, these are the male parts of a flower. Stamens are the male parts of a flower, and collectively they are called as androecium. And collectively the stamens are called as androecium. Stamen is the male part of a flower. It consists of a bilobed anther and a thread-like filament. Okay, stamen has a bilobed anther. Now anther is bilobed, like this is bilobed anther. Okay, and if we draw a slightly bigger diagram of the anther, it looks like this. Okay, this is the filament and this is the bilobed anther. Bilobed means it has two lobes, and each, suppose these are the two lobes, and each lobe has two pollen sacs. So we will have these two and these. So we have total 4 pollen sacs in a bilobed anther. And what is present in the pollen sacs? In the pollen sacs are present fine grain-like structures, and these are the male gametes. We call them as pollen grains. PG, I will write here, PG stands for pollen grains. So pollen grains are the male gametes present in the pollen sacs of anther, bilobed anther. Anther has 2 lobes and each lobe has 2 pollen sacs, and in the pollen sacs are present the male gametes or the pollen grains. That's why this stamen is the male part of a flower. Stamen is the male part of a flower. Why? Because of the presence of the pollen grains. Because of the presence of the pollen grains, we call stamen as the male parts of a flower. And stamens are collectively called as androecium. Okay, so each stamen has a bilobed anther and a long thread-like filament connected to the ovary. Okay, so this is the third whorl of a flower. Understand? Now these stamens or the androeciums, they may be free or united, as in the case of sepals and the petals. For example, if the sepals are free, they are called as polysepals, but if they are fused, if the sepals are fused, they are called as gamosepals. And if the petals are free, they are called as polypetals. Okay, but when they are fused, we call them as gamopetals. Okay, polypetals when they are free, and gamopetals when the petals are united. Similarly, the androeciums, the stamens, they may be free. We call them as polyandroeciums. Okay, or we call them as monoadelphous. Monoadelphous is a condition in which the stamens are free. Monoadelphous. Monoadelphous is a condition in which the stamens or the filaments are free. Now sometimes there are 2 clusters of stamens joined by their filaments. Okay, the filaments are joined here. Okay, suppose this is one cluster and the filaments are joined here. This is the second cluster, and that condition we call them as diadelphous. Understand? Similarly, triadelphous and the other conditions may be also present in case of the stamen. This is the third whorl of a flower. The fourth whorl of a flower is the female part of a flower that we call as the pistil. Fourth whorl of the flower is the female part that we call as the pistil. A pistil consists of a upper stigma, a middle style, and a basal ovary. The upper stigma is the knob-like structure present at the apex of the pistil, which consists of the glandular papillae or hairy structures present at the knob, meant for the reception of the pollen grains from the anther. Usually what happens during pollination, the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Understand? And how does the stigma receive these pollen grains? By the presence of its glandular papillae or hairy-like or feathery structures present at the stigma. Understand? So this way they are catching these pollen grains, and then through the style they reach the ovary. Now the second is the style. Style is that part of a pistil. Pistil is the female part of a flower, right? Female part of a flower. It consists of stigma, style, and ovary. Stigma, we discussed that it is a knob-like structure meant for the reception of the pollen grains from the anther. And number second is the style. Style is a tubular structure, tubular slender structure which connects the stigma with the ovary. Okay, so this is acts like a funnel. Number third is the ovary. Ovary is the basal swollen part of a pistil. This is the basal swollen part of a pistil. Okay, it may consist of a single chamber or many chambers. It may consist of a single chamber or many chambers or locules. Chambers are also known as locules, and inside each locule are present the ovules. Ovules are the female gametes. Ovules are the female gametes. Okay, these are present inside each locule, and these ovules or female gametes are present inside the ovary, are connected to the wall of the ovary by the placenta. 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 And they connect these ovules with the wall of the ovary. And since ovules are the female gametes or ova or egg present inside the pistil, that's why we call the pistil as the female part of a flower. Understand? So this is all about the basic structure of a flower, wherein we studied the four different whorls. That is, the first one was the sepals, second one was the petals, third one was the androecium or the stamens, fourth one was the pistil. Understand? Okay. This is about the basic structure of a flower. Now we shall study what is a complete and an incomplete flower. A complete flower is a flower in which all the four floral whorls are present, like the sepal, petal, androecium, and gynoecium. Pistils we collectively called as the gynoecium. Okay. When all these four whorls are present in a flower, we call that flower as complete flower. When all the four floral whorls are present, we call that flower as the complete flower. Now, what is incomplete flower? When any one of these four whorls, we have four whorls here, sepal, petal, androecium, and gynoecium. When any of these four whorls, any one of these four whorls is absent, we call that flower as the incomplete flower. We call that flower as the incomplete flower. So basically, an incomplete flower is any flower which is lacking one of these four whorls. Okay, understand? Okay. The other thing we shall study are the essential and non-essential parts of a flower. The essential parts of a flower are those parts of a flower which are actually participating in the reproduction. What are participating in the reproduction here? That is the male part, stamen or androecium, and the female part, that pistil or gynoecium. So androecium and gynoecium are stamens and pistils. They're actually participating in the reproduction. So we call these parts as the essential parts of a flower because they're essential for the reproduction. And non-essential parts are the sepals and petals because they are not needed for reproduction. The only job of the sepal and petal is that they are providing the protection to the reproductive parts of a flower, and like the petals, they are brightly colored, they are attracting the insects or the honeybees for the pollination, but they are not directly involved in the reproduction. Only androecium and gynoecium are involved directly in the reproduction. That's why we call androecium and gynoecium as the essential parts of a flower and sepals and petals as the non-essential parts of a flower. Understand? Okay. The other thing we shall discuss is the parents. Well, we already discussed it. When the sepals and the petals, they look like each other and they cannot be differentiated from each other, that's the condition is called as the parent. What are the bracteates and nectaries? Sometimes a flower, this is a flower, arises in the axil of leaves. These are the leaves, leaf-like structures. So the flower is arising from the axil of the leaves. Okay, and these leaf-like structures are called as the bracts. These leaf-like structures are called as the bracts. Usually these bracts are green in color, but in some cases, in some flowers, they are colored, they are colorful. The example is the bougainvillea. If I will draw this is the flower bracts of a bougainvillea. Okay, and they are brightly colored. They are brightly colored. This is the example of the bougainvillea bracts. They are brightly colored, and we mistake them for flowers. They are not the flowers, but they are the bracts. The actual flowers are those small yellow-like structures present here, present at the tip of the leaf, and these are the actual flowers. These are the actual flowers, and the usual large brightly colored part, that's not the flower, those are the bracts. This is the case of bougainvillea. Now nectaries. Nectaries are the small glands present at the base of the corolla, at the base of the petal, or at the base of the ovary. Okay, and their job is to produce the nectar. Nectar is a sweet, fragrant like liquid secreted by those nectaries, secreted by these nectaries. So this is basically attracting the insects. Insects visit the flowers and to drink this nectar, and during the process, the pollen grains get attached to their legs or wings, and thereafter when they fly to another flower or the same flower, and when they step on this stigma, the pollen grains attached to these insects or honeybees, then after landing on the stigma, reach the ovaries for the style, and the fertilization happens here. So that's the case of the fertilization or pollination. So these nectaries are producing the nectar. Nectar is a sweet, fragrant like liquid produced by these nectaries. Now sexuality in flowers. Like in animals we have males, females, okay. Similarly, sexuality is also present in the flowers. A flower may be male, a flower may be female, or a flower may be bisexual, that is hermaphrodite. When both the male and female parts, that is the androecium and gynoecium, are present in a flower, we call that flower as a hermaphrodite. Okay? And when only the male part is present in a flower, we call that flower as staminate flower or male flower. Similarly, a pistillate or a female flower is the flower in which only the pistils are present. Okay? We have bisexual flower, both male and female parts present. We have pistillate flower, only the female part is present. We have staminate flower, only the male part is present. We also have neuter flowers. In neuter flowers, none of the male or female parts are present. Okay? Neither the male part is present, that's androecium is not present, neither the female part or gynoecium is that's not present. Both are absent. Male and female parts both are absent. Such a flower is called as a neuter flower, and the example is the ray florets of sunflower. In sunflower, the florets we see they are neuters. They do not have any of the reproductive parts. Understand? And the other condition is the inflorescence. What do you know about inflorescence? Inflorescence is the arrangement of flowers in different plants. Like how you see that we have different flowers, but their arrangement is also different in different plants, isn't it? We have different arrangement of flowers. Okay? So the inflorescence is the arrangement of flowers in a plant, like how different flowers are arranged. Okay? Now the first type of arrangement, there are many inflorescence, many types of arrangement, but we shall only study the basic ones here. The inflorescence may be like, there will only be a terminal flower present at the apex of the main axis. This is the axis of the plant, and this is only one flower present at terminal apex. This is one kind of inflorescence. Now the other kind is that, the flower is present at the apex of the main axis, but there are also flowers present at the apex of the lateral axis or lateral branches. Okay, so this is second kind of inflorescence. And third kind is flowers are arising from the axils of the leaves, from the different axils of the leaves, but they are reaching the same height. So this kind of inflorescence, where the flowers are gathered like a cluster, they are arising from the different axils, but they are attaining the same height. The example is, there are many examples like, okay, and the other kind of inflorescence is the case of sunflower, while the young flowers are present at the center and old flowers are present are surrounding these young flowers, and they are also attaining the same height. The example is this sunflower. So these are the few kinds of arrangements or inflorescence present in different plants. Okay. So in this lecture we studied that the flower is a specialized shoot in which the leaves are modified into different floral structures, and those floral structures are present here: sepals, stamens, petals, and pistils. These are the four whorls of a flower. Okay. We also studied complete, incomplete, essential, non-essential parts of a flower. We studied the perianth. Okay, when the sepals and petals, they cannot be differentiated from each other. And we also studied the bracts. When the flower is arising in the axil of a leaf, those leaf-like structures are called as the bracts. We also studied the nectaries. These are the glands which are producing the nectar, the sexuality in flowers, and also the inflorescence. So this is all about the basic knowledge about the structure of a flower and the different floral parts. Understand? So this is all about this lecture. Thank you very much. Hello there. I hope you are doing well. I welcome you all to another video lecture wherein we shall study about this. It's actually a brief new brand chapter wherein we are going to discuss about pollination and fertilization. Well, starting with the basic definition of the pollination, we say that pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. What is anther? What is stigma? Anther is the male part of a flower. Anther is the male part of a flower, and stigma is the receptacle or the receiving part of the female part of a flower. Understand? And stigma is the female part of a flower. So the transfer of male gametes or pollen grains, the transfer of male gametes or pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower is called as pollination. Is called as pollination. Well, now we have the different kinds of the pollination. There are many, but the basic two kinds of pollination are the self-pollination and the cross-pollination. Self-pollination means when the transfer of pollen grains or when the pollination is happening on the same plant, whether it is same flower or different flower, but the plant is same. Only single plant is required for self-pollination, right? The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma occurs in the same flower or the different flowers of the same plant. The prime condition is that the plant is same. And then there we have another kind of pollination, that is cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower from one plant to another plant. Means two plants are required in case of cross-pollination, while as only one plant is required in case of self-pollination. Right? This is a diagrammatic representation of the different kinds of pollination. This number one, autogamy, and number second, geitonogamy. These two are the types of self-pollination. Autogamy and geitonogamy are the types of self-pollination. And third one, allogamy. Allogamy is the type of cross-pollination. I will write allogamy here. Allogamy is the kind of cross-pollination. What happens in the autogamy? Here, this is a plant, a rough diagram of the plant I have drawn here. These are the leaves, okay? And these are the flowers. These are the flowers. In autogamy, the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma occurs on the same flower. I wrote here, same flower. Means the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Okay, so both this anther and the stigma are contributed by the same flower. Means the pollination is occurring in the same flower. The pollen grains as well as the stigma, they are from the same flower. So this condition is called as autogamy, and autogamy is one of the types of the self-pollination, right? And another kind of self-pollination is geitonogamy. In geitonogamy, the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma is occurring on the same plant, but this time the flowers are different. You see, from one flower to another flower. This arrow shows the direction of the transfer of pollen grains. The pollen grains are getting transferred from one flower to another flower on the same plant. So this condition is called as geitonogamy, means we have different flowers but same plant. And third kind of pollination is the allogamy. It is actually the cross pollination. You see here the arrow is indicating the direction of the transfer of pollen grains from one plant to another plant, right? So the transfer of pollen grains from one plant to another plant, but of same species. Look, this is very important. You have to mention same species here, right? So the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of different plants is called as cross-pollination, and allogamy is one of the kind of the cross-pollination. Both in, we have the same plant in case of the self-pollination and two different plants in case of the cross-pollination. But the prime requirement, either self-pollination or cross-pollination, is that the pollination or the pollen grain transfer, it always occurs. This pollination is always occurs between the pollination always occurs between the members of the same species. Between the members of the same species. For example, we have a garden where there are different kinds of flowers. We have rose growing there. We have sunflower growing there. We have also large trees like neem, banyan, or mango, peepal, shisham, or any other tree. The flower of one plant, say rose flower, the stigma of the rose flower, it can receive the pollen grains from other plants as well. Because pollen grains, there are many agents of the pollination. Say air, this honeybee. Honeybee, for example, honeybee that is right now which is sucking the nectar from the rose flower. Previously it has been to neem plant, it has been to shisham, it has been to sunflower. So it can bring pollen grains from different plants as well, right? Because honeybee is not going to say that, no, I'm not taking your pollen grains because I am going to rose flower now. So why should I take your pollen grains? No, this is not the condition. This is not how it works. Whenever the honeybee or any pollinating agent, they travel between the flowers of the different plants, they do not differentiate that whether they are bringing pollen grains of one plant or another plant. They cannot differentiate. They do not differentiate because their primary job, their primary work is to suck the nectar. And whether they get nectar from rose flower, neem flower, sunflower, any flower, it does not matter to them as long as they are getting the nectar. So what was I telling you, that for pollination it's important that the plants that are pollinating, they should be of the same species, which means that though this stigma of the rose flower, it can get pollen from rose flower, it may receive pollen from sunflower, but only the pollen of its own species, that is only rose flower, only they can germinate on its stigma. Are you getting me? For example, we have a rose flower here, right? We have a rose flower here, and the stigma of the rose flower can get pollen grains from, say, mango or sunflower as well as rose flower. The pollen grain of all of these kinds will land on the stigma of the rose flower, but only the stigma of the pollen of the rose flower are going to germinate. The pollen of the mango or sunflower will not germinate. This is because of the compatibility issues. which we will discuss later. But for the generalization, I can tell you that, like we humans, we only marry with the humans. A man marries a woman, right? A man does not marry a cow, right? So same thing happens in case of the plants. The successful transfer of pollen grains always occurs between the members, between the plants of the same species. Understand? Now we have the advantage of what is the requirement for the self pollination? The prime requirement for the self pollination is the bisexuality. Means bisexuality means that both either the flower is bisexual, means both the male and the female parts are on the same plant, means the anther and the stigma are on the same flower. The anther and stigma are on the same flower. That's number one condition for the self pollination. The other condition is that if not the previous case, means both the male and the female parts are not on the same flower, but at least there should be male and female flowers on the same plant. Either the male and female parts should be on the same plant, same flower, or on the same plant. So that's the prime condition for the bisexuality. And number second is the homogamy. Homogamy means that the male and the female parts should also mature at the same time. Understand? So both the anther and the stigma, they should get matured at the same time for the successful self-pollination. If one of these, either stigma or the pollen grains, if they mature at different times, say one matures in the spring and the other matures in autumn, or there's a break of 10, 20 days or a month, then self-pollination cannot happen. So these are the two prime conditions for the self-pollination, that is bisexuality and homogamy. Homogamy means anther and the stigma should mature at the same time. Understand? And number second, yes, there's one more condition for self-pollination. In some flowers, in some bisexual flowers, actually bisexual means both the male and female, that's anther and stigma, they are present in the same flower. The male and the female parts are present in the same flower. That's the bisexual flowers. So what happens in some bisexual flowers? The flowers always remain closed; they do not open. Which means that the male and the female parts are always covered by the petals, or in some cases sepals as well, which means that the flower does not open. So in that condition, it is very likely that the male and female parts inside this closed flower, they will self-fertilize, which will result in the self-pollination. And those flowers are called as clistogamous flowers. I will write here. Clistogamous flowers. Clistogamous means those flowers which do not open at all, and which are making sure that this self-pollination will happen between the male and female parts inside these flowers. Those flowers are called as clistogamous flowers, and the phenomenon is called as clistogamy. Okay. Now we have the self-pollination has its own advantages and disadvantages. What are the advantages of the self-pollination? The advantage of the self-pollination is that the pollination is very sure. The pollination is very sure because both the male and female parts are present on the same flower or on the same plant, so the pollination is very sure. And number second, the self-pollination is very economical. Economical in what context? It means that the self-pollinating flowers, they do not have to be showy. They do not have to bring up beautiful petals so that they can attract the insects or other pollinating agents. Why? Because they are self-fertilizing. They do not require they do not have the requirement of the showy petals to attract large number of insects. Because as we see in the clistogamous flowers, the flowers are not opening at all. So why would they require the pollinating agents? They do not require so. And number third point is that they also do not have to produce a large number of pollen grains, because self-pollination is very sure as compared to the cross-pollination. In cross-pollination, you are at the mercy of the pollinating agents, that if the pollinating agents will come, only then they can cross-pollinate. However, in case of the self-pollination, where the same flower, autogamy or different flowers, there is not the requirement to make a large number of pollen grains. Means this kind of pollination is very economical for the plant. So similarly, we have the disadvantages of self-pollination. What are the disadvantages? Disadvantages is that the weaker generations, they cannot be, they always stay there. They always stay there, because self-pollination is happening. If there is any a weaker trait or any weak character present in the plant, it cannot be avoided. It will always stay there. Okay. And now we shall discuss about the cross-pollination. Cross-pollination for allogamy is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one plant to the stigma of another plant, but of the same species, right? Cross-pollination also has its own advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are that new varieties can be formed, right? Because from one plant to another plant, so some characters from one plant can get transferred to the future generations. So new varieties can be made. This is in case of the cross pollination. However, cross pollination is not so economical. It is very costly for the plant, because it has to produce a large number of pollen grains. Say when the agent is air pollination, the number of pollen grains is very large, because it is not always like that if the plant is producing 100 pollen grains and all 100 pollen grains will land on the plant. No, some may land on the stigma or some may not land, some may get washed away by the rain or blown away by the wind, right? So this is not so economical. This is very costly process. Cross pollination is very costly process, and the plant has also to produce a large number of showy petals so that they can attract the insects, honeybees or other pollinating agents, right? So there is also the wastage of nutrients here. However, cross pollination has its advantages, as well as I told you that new combinations or new varieties can be made. So this is all about this basic lecture wherein we studied about the pollination, the different kinds, and the advantage and the disadvantage. Thank you for watching me.